Have you ever wondered why our behavior is so contagious? I mean, it's funny how we spend all of our time, not all, but a lot of our time, mimicking people, whether it's movie stars, whether it's fashion figures, whatever it is. I mean, it would appear to me at least that Pinterest and Tumblr and some of these media photography kind of sites, social media sites, really thrive off of that. It ultimately kind of brings us into some measure of conformity with each other when it comes to fashion, or like these kids, everybody has a tongue piercing, for example. So we're going to look at, in Module 44, we're going to look a little bit at social influence and how it operates and kind of the key components of it. There's been some fascinating experiments that have been done in this particular area to demonstrate just how prone we are to be influenced by something we refer to as mimicry. Mimicry itself is the kind of thing that actually leads to looking like others, as the name would suggest. It's the basis for empathy, because we are so busy looking and feeling feeling like the other person. But the whole idea of mimicry really is part of what creates and sets the stage for conformity. And even in their non-conformity, there's a high level of conformity, as you see in this picture. Now, one of the key concepts is often referred to as the chameleon effect. And the chameleon effect itself refers to our natural tendency to mimic each other. There's a fair amount of unconscious mimicry that goes on, even when you're around people, whether it's people in another culture, in another area of even our own culture, our own country. We begin to, if I grew up in the upper Midwest and I go to the South, and before too long I would develop somewhat of a Southern drawl, picking up some of the phraseology. I went to school with a guy from North Carolina, and I used to joke all the time about how he couldn't pronounce the word want. For him, it would be pronounced won't. And the word won't in his lexicon would be pronounced as an upper Midwestern want. And so these kind of characteristics of speech and other things help us fit in some respects. And we it also gives us some insight into how others are feeling, which is the basis for empathy that I was referring to before. So it also explains why we feel happier around happy people, or why research has revealed something that we refer to as mood linkage. And oftentimes you'll see that even in a workplace, where somebody will come in a cranky mood, and it tends to spread within the workplace itself. People get more irritable, more grumpy with each other, short, terse in their language patterns, and so forth. So mood linkage is also a part of that. We've gone so far, even in research, to take note of the fact that people in experiments with a confederate, and remember, a confederate in an experiment is somebody who's cooperating with the experimenter unbeknownst to the actual subject. And so when the participants would shake their own foot when they saw a foot-shaking person, and this goes and connects up to the mirror neurons that we were referring to earlier. One of the key concepts, which I mentioned just a minute ago, is the idea of conformity, and oftentimes one way or ways to remember key people that are connected to the conformity experiments is a guy by the name of Solomon Asch. And he found that under certain conditions, people will conform to a group's judgment even when it's clearly incorrect. And that's a key concept. It goes along with group norms and how influential they are to bring people into conformity with whatever the norm is. If you've been ever in a group and people are very open and honest, the chances of you being equally as open and honest is far greater. Experiments indicate that conformity increases under a number of different conditions, and the conditions that fit into this particular area would be when we feel incompetent or insecure. This is the conditions under which conformity impacts us. So conformity works, if you will. Some of the research of Asch was further refined, and that's what I'm going to tell you about here. So when we feel incompetent or insecure, if you go into a novel situation, you will automatically survey the situation to see how people are behaving, how they are talking. If they're talking in a quiet tone of voice, you probably will as well. You walk into a funeral home, for example, and it's very quiet. You will tend to feel somewhat insecure because you're not real sure what to do, and then you will conform to the behavior that you see around you. A second one is admiring the group's status. When I was in school, and we don't have it on CCU's campus, but CU, CSU both do, is the Greek system, where fraternities and sororities exist. And it was well known in the areas in which we operated that certain fraternities were very desirable to be a part of because of the status they gave you. And this is a good example of that. A third one is no prior commitment to behaving a particular way. So no prior commitment to a particular response. So if you go in not intending to behave a particular way, then you're more prone to conform to the situation that you find yourself in. The last one, number 4, down here, way down the corner, is being observed. So when we tend to be, people are watching what we will do, or we perceive that we're being watched, then our tendency is to conform as well. I would challenge you to think through a little bit how we can impact people for good behavior, for positive behavior, not maybe good, but positive behavior, by the norms we set in place, whether it's in a classroom or whether it's in a group itself. There are 2 other key concepts. One is normative social influence. And normative social influence is we perform or conform to the norms in order to gain social approval. So that's what the outcome is of that one. The last one is, put an arrow. The other one that's important to take into account is what we refer to as informational social influence. And I'll just put info social influence. I'll just abbreviate it here. Informational social influence is where we accept information about reality that's provided by a particular group. You see this in a lot of political ads that we were deluged with over the last political campaign, is that we will align with a certain group and therefore accept the information coming from that particular group and dismiss information coming from another group, which impacts partisanship. Which essentially is an individual that aligns very strongly with one party over another. What even in the Second World War, the rebels in France were referred to as the partisans, and so they were the ones that were fighting on the side of the Allies to resist the influence and impact of the Nazi regime. So those are the key concepts to begin with in terms of social influence: mimicry or automatic mimicry, the chameleon effect, and then looking at conformity, which is one of the biggest topics in social influence. And Solomon Asch is the key person who performed that research.